Story 1. When my roommates came home after a week-long business trip, their faces froze in shock. It was almost poetic the way their expressions shifted from confusion to disbelief and finally to disgust. The kitchen, which they'd left in ruins, was now alive, swarming, festering, rotting. I'd watched the mold bloom over the dirty plates, staining them green and black. Flies danced in lazy circles around overflowing garbage bags. The smell had seeped into every corner, a thick, rancid presence that clung to clothes and skin, inescapable. I'd warned them countless times, clean up after yourselves, I'd said, my voice steady and calm, betraying none of the storm brewing inside. They'd laughed, shrugged, ignored. I was their maid, their ghost, a presence they'd come to rely on without ever acknowledging. Not this time. I'd sat quietly all week, savoring each stage of decay. The milk turning sour, swelling until the carton burst and leaked across the counter. The pasta they'd left out turning slick and gray, pooling in oily residue. And their favorite, the leftover takeout they'd forgotten in the oven, transformed into a pulsating hive of maggots. I never lifted a finger to stop it. Instead, I watched the chaos unfold, each day more satisfying than the last. Their outrage when they discovered the kitchen was delicious. Dude, what the hell? Kyle shouted, covering his mouth and gagging dramatically. Brian stood frozen, speechless, eyes wide in disbelief. I told you, I said quietly, watching as they realized this wasn't some prank, but an act of deliberate neglect. I'm done cleaning up your mess. They had no idea how far I'd go to make a point. Kyle and Brian spent the next day scrubbing, retching, and blaming each other, completely oblivious that I was already planning my next move. They thought the kitchen disaster was punishment enough, but I needed them to suffer more. It wasn't about cleanliness anymore, it was about respect or the lack thereof. So that night, I began my second act. While they slept, I calmly slipped into their rooms and swapped out their shampoo bottles with industrial-strength hair dye. Watching Brian's horror as his dark hair turned a patchy, violent pink the next morning was exhilarating. Kyle's screams echoed through the house as he emerged from the shower, his beard a vivid neon green, like radioactive moss. What the heck did you do? Brian demanded, almost shaking with anger. I met his gaze and smiled softly. Nothing, I lied calmly, savoring his helpless rage. Must have been something you used. You should really be more careful. Their humiliation was sweet, but still, I craved more. 3 days later, while their dyed hair was still vibrant, their professional reputations taking hit after hit, I executed my final act of revenge. Both Kyle and Brian relied heavily on their laptops, their jobs a fragile tower built on endless meetings and critical emails. It was almost too easy, just a gentle splash of liquid onto their keyboards, disguised carefully as an accident. Watching Brian frantically tapping his keys, his laptop blinking erratically before dying completely, was deeply satisfying. Kyle nearly sobbed, cursing his luck, desperately trying to dry his precious machine. They panicked, shouted, accused each other, but never suspected me. After all, I was their quiet roommate, the pushover who'd never push back. But something shifted that day. Watching them crumble under stress, their arrogance peeling away layer by layer, revealed something darker inside me. Their misery wasn't enough, I wanted to witness their breakdown. To watch as their lives unraveled, piece by piece. Now, as I watched them scrub the kitchen for the 5th time, their spirits broken, their pride obliterated, I'm not satisfied, not yet. They're learning, yes, but the lesson isn't over. There's more to come, more layers to peel away, more humiliation to endure. I'm patient. I'll wait. I'll savor every detail, every twitch of despair, until they finally understand. You never really know someone until you push them too far. And they've only begun to see who I truly am. Story 2. My neighbor, Chad, was the kind of guy who thought rules were for other people. Loud music late at night, trash overflowing into my yard, and worst of all, constantly blocking my driveway with his beat-up Mustang. I'd politely asked him to move countless times, but each request was met with a smirk, or worse, silence. I wasn't a pushover, I was patient, calm, but there's a line. This morning, he crossed it. I had an important job interview, the kind that could finally change my life, but when I stepped outside, Chad's Mustang was parked so carelessly it blocked me completely. I rang his doorbell, pounded on his door, nothing. My frustration turned to something colder, quieter. I wasn't missing this chance because of him. Without another word, I dialed the non-emergency police line. Within 20 minutes, 2 officers arrived, clearly annoyed by the inconvenience but willing to handle the situation. As the officers examined Chad's car, something shifted. One officer leaned in closer, staring intently at something visible through the window. His expression hardened immediately. Stay here, he told me firmly, suddenly alert. My heart sped up. This wasn't about a blocked driveway anymore, something was very wrong. Minutes later, Chad stumbled outside, shirtless, bleary-eyed, and cursing. What's going on? He demanded arrogantly. The officers ignored his attitude completely. We need to search your vehicle, the officer stated flatly. What for? Chad's bravado began to fade, replaced by a quiet panic. I haven't done anything. Then you won't mind opening the trunk, the officer pressed. Chad hesitated, his hands trembling slightly as he handed over his keys. The second the trunk opened, I knew something was terribly wrong. Chad's eyes widened in horror as the officers pulled out a small, tightly wrapped package, then another. The officers exchanged grim looks, already aware they just stumbled onto something big. What the heck is that? Chad stammered, his voice cracking. You tell us, one officer replied coldly, already reaching for handcuffs. Chad was speechless, his arrogant facade crumbling entirely. Neighbors had started to gather, whispering amongst themselves. They'd seen Chad's arrogance before, but this was another level. As Chad was led away, cuffed and visibly shaken, he caught my gaze. His eyes pleaded silently, but I only stared back, calm and unmoving. This wasn't personal, not at first. But he'd made his choices and now finally he was facing the consequences. The officers thanked me briefly, barely acknowledging my presence before driving off, lights flashing silently. The driveway was clear and the neighborhood was quiet again, but different now, forever changed by a discovery no one expected. I climbed into my car, heart still racing, but with a newfound calm. Chad had blocked more than my driveway. He disrupted my life, pushed boundaries without regard for anyone else. But in his reckless arrogance, he'd finally tripped himself up and I'd been there, quietly, patiently, to watch him fall. As I drove away to my interview, I felt a strange, dark satisfaction. Chad had thought he was untouchable, but he'd learned the hard way rules applied to everyone, and sometimes justice had a way of revealing itself at just the right moment. Story 3. Today I messed up big time. It was supposed to be just another dull morning commute, an hour and a half of zoning out to my favorite playlist. I climbed aboard the crowded bus, popped in my headphones, and sank into my seat, grateful for the chance to block out the world. Now, I have these fancy conductive headphones, the type that send vibrations through your bones. The sound feels like it's coming from all around you, not directly in your ears. I love them because they're comfortable, immersive, and ironically less intrusive to others. Or so I thought. As the bus crawled through traffic, I relaxed, nodding gently to the beat, blissfully unaware that my Bluetooth was completely off. What I didn't realize was that my music wasn't coming through my headphones at all, but blasting directly from my phone's speakers, loud enough for everyone within earshot to hear clearly. Nobody said anything. At first, I didn't even notice the occasional side-eye glances or subtle shifts from people nearby. I assumed they were just being typical city commuters, bored or irritated by the usual inconveniences of public transit. For 90 long minutes, I sat there, obliviously sharing my questionable taste in early 2000s pop-punk classics and cheesy anime soundtracks with an entire bus full of unwilling listeners. But here's where it gets even worse. Not only was my playlist questionable, but it had a few personal guilty pleasure tracks, think sentimental breakup songs, embarrassingly emotional ballads, and even some audio from meditation guides I'd forgotten to delete. Yes, a soothing voice urging me to breathe deeply, feel your chakra aligning, echoed loudly through the bus, making everyone around me acutely aware of my attempts at mindfulness. Still, nobody confronted me. They sat quietly, perhaps pitying me, judging silently, or both. Eventually, I noticed a guy seated diagonally from me recording discreetly on his phone, a smug grin on his face. I thought it was odd, but I shrugged it off, assuming he was filming something funny happening behind me. Only when I stood up to exit the bus, feeling refreshed from my private musical journey, did I see the truth. As I glanced down at my phone, my heart sank. Bluetooth off. The horrible realization crashed down all at once, the music, the awkward stares, the secretive laughter. My cheeks burned hot with humiliation. As I stepped off the bus, I heard a voice call after me. It was the guy who'd been recording. "Hey man, thanks for the concert." He gave me a thumbs up, laughing as the doors closed. My embarrassment turned into a weird sense of camaraderie. I was the idiot who'd made everyone's commute unforgettable. Now, sitting in my office, desperately hoping the video of me nodding along blissfully unaware doesn't end up trending online. I'm torn between embarrassment and amusement. But at least next time I'll remember to double-check my Bluetooth and maybe skip the meditation tracks in public. Comment: if anyone had the nerve to tell you, the whole bus probably enjoyed the free concert. Honestly, sounds like you gave them a memorable ride. Way better than awkward silence and engine noise. Story 4. A friend of mine works in emergency medicine. He's seen a lot. But when he told me the story, his hands trembled a little. And I've never seen him tremble. A woman was brought in after a major highway collision. She was riding in the back of a pickup when it happened, hit from behind, thrown hard. When the paramedics found her, she was crumpled under the tailgate. Her head was broken, long strands of hair trailing behind her like threads from a broken doll. Her scalp had been partially torn off, peeled back like wet paper. They rushed her in, but her vitals flatlined en route. No pulse. No signs of consciousness. By the time they got her to the hospital, it was too late. Or at least they thought it was. Paperwork was filed. The time of passing was noted. She was zipped into a body bag and sent to the basement, where the morgue staff waited with the same grim efficiency they always had. These people are used to silence, to loss. They see the end of stories. They don't expect them to continue. Until she sat up. It was during the standard post-intake examination. My friend's colleague was logging physical injuries, prepping the body for refrigeration, when the woman twitched. He assumed it was residual nerve activity, common enough to not panic. But then her lips moved, her head rolled sideways, and she whispered, "Where are my children?" The attendant froze. The whisper had come from inside the zipped bag. She said it again, louder this time. "Where are my children?" The scream that followed shook the entire basement. Nurses came running. A surgeon on break dropped his coffee. My friend, who was on call upstairs, rushed down to the morgue and found a woman sitting upright. Her matted hair framing a face etched with confusion and terror. She was alive. Not a miracle. A misreading. Her vitals had crashed so hard, so suddenly, that even experienced medics had assumed she was gone. But some thread, some stubborn part of her, had held on. The first thing she did when fully conscious wasn't ask where she was. She didn't cry or panic. She kept repeating the same thing. "Where are my children?" Over and over. She didn't know her name, couldn't remember the accident. But she knew she had children. Turned out she had two. A 5-year-old and a toddler. Both had been in the back seat of the car that hit the truck she was riding in. Both survived with only minor injuries. When they brought the oldest in to see her, she didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just reached out. Slowly, shakily, and whispered again, "I found you." She made a full recovery. Months of skin grafts, facial surgery, trauma therapy. But she lived. Every time my friend tells this story, he ends the same way. "They called it a medical anomaly," he says, voice low. But to me, felt like something bigger. Like a mother's love yanked her back from the edge. And honestly, I believe him. Story 5. There's a story in my hometown that people only whisper about. My grandmother told me late one night when the power went out and the candles made shadows dance on the walls. It's not in any newspaper, not recorded in any official archive. But everyone here knows it. They just don't talk about it. 40 years ago, a woman named Marla lived on the edge of town. A widow, quiet, known mostly for her flower garden, and the little boy who followed her everywhere. His name was Ethan. He was 9 when it happened. Ethan had been walking home from school one afternoon when a man named Calvin Hurst sped around the corner in his black Cadillac. Witnesses say Calvin never even braked. Just a loud thud, then silence. Ethan's small body lay crumpled on the sidewalk, his backpack still zipped, a juice box crushed in his hand. The town was shaken, but not surprised when Calvin walked free. His father owned half the county, real estate, trucking companies, even a piece of the sheriff's office. The official report blamed Ethan for darting into the road. No charges were filed. Calvin's car was washed, detailed, and back on the road in under a week. Marla didn't speak at the funeral. She didn't cry. She just stared at the casket, her face blank. People said grief had broken her, that she'd drift into silence and eventually disappear. But she didn't. She started watching. Over the next 6 months, Marla became a ghost in Calvin's life. She followed him quietly, methodically. She learned his habits. Where he drank, when he left the bar, where he parked his car. She found out about his family, too, a wife named Lena, 2 daughters in elementary school, a house on the nicer side of town. She even learned what kind of wine they liked, what day the girls had ballet practice. Then one morning, neighbors reported a black Cadillac found in a field just outside town. Tires slashed. Windshield shattered. Interior gutted, soaked in gasoline. No one could prove it, but everyone had the same name on their lips, Marla. A month later, it happened. Calvin had just gotten home from dinner with clients. Lena and the girls were inside already. He stepped out of his car, briefcase in hand, when he saw her standing by his front steps. Marla. She was holding something in both hands. The rest is fragments, pieces passed down through whispers and rumor. But here's what we know. She didn't scream. She didn't speak. She stepped forward and struck Calvin once, hard and fast. Then she went inside. Within minutes, sirens were wailing across town. When officers entered the house, they found 4 people on the floor. Calvin, Lena, the 2 girls, and Marla. She had used the same blade on herself right there in the middle of the living room. Her final act complete. The house was sealed. Sold. Torn down 5 years later. Nothing stands there now but an empty lot with brittle grass and a crooked tree. People still say they hear things on late autumn nights, especially. A car door slamming. Footsteps on gravel. A soft voice calling a name that never gets answered. Marla's story isn't in books, but in our town it's in the air. A warning. A grief so deep it turned quiet love into something sharp and irreversible. And every time I walk past that empty lot, I remember what my grandmother whispered that night. She wasn't trying to escape justice. She became it. Story 6. 2 months ago, I moved into what I thought was a quiet apartment. Nice lighting, cheap rent, and thick walls, or so I was told. The first few nights were peaceful. Until 1:06 a.m. on a Tuesday. That was the night the guitar started. Not just any guitar, some second-hand, scratchy, buzzing slab of plastic connected to an amp that sounded like it had been rescued from a burning dumpster. And not just music, full blast, distorted death metal solos, the kind that sound like someone strangling a blender full of bolts. It was my upstairs neighbor. Let's call him Artyom. At first, I thought maybe it was a one-off. Some stress relief. A bad breakup. But it happened again. And again. Every night like clockwork, around 1 a.m. right as I was starting to drift into sleep, the walls would start humming. Then the screeching would begin. Tremolo picking. Blast beats. Random screams. Always the same 2 or 3 riffs like a demon auditioning for a garage band. The first week, I knocked on his door. No answer. Second week, I taped a note, please keep the volume down after midnight. Some of us work early. Next night, he played louder. By week 3, I was a zombie. My sleep-deprived brain was fraying. Dark thoughts started to creep in. My eye twitched constantly. I drank more coffee than water. I even bought a white noise machine. It couldn't compete with Artyom's amp from the underworld. But calling the police? Useless in my country. Noise complaints get ignored unless they involve fireworks or a full marching band. So I started planning. I spent the next few nights researching everything I could about sound frequencies and how to make someone deeply, psychologically uncomfortable without breaking any laws. I didn't want revenge. I wanted silence. But I was willing to get creative. First step, I bought a dog whistle. It emits a high-pitched frequency that most people can't hear, but some people do. Especially the hungover, stressed, and already cranky. Every night, right before Artyom's usual solo, I'd walk into the hallway and blow the whistle. Just once. Then I'd wait. No sound that night. But the next? Oh, the guitar was back. Only this time it was angrier. Second step, I purchased a smart speaker and placed it against the ceiling in my living room, directly under his bedroom. Using an automation app, I scheduled it to play looped audio of construction noise, jackhammers, drills, metal clanking at exactly 6 a.m. every day. Not super loud, just enough to make someone upstairs dream of demolition crews. The third morning, I heard him stomp down the hallway and slam his door. Progress. Then I got surgical. One afternoon while he was out, I slipped a Bluetooth speaker through the mail slot in his door, pre-connected to my phone. I played soothing ocean waves for 12 hours straight. The next day, cows mooing. Day after that, a baby crying on loop. He never mentioned it. But the music stopped. It's been 10 days since the last midnight concert. I sleep with my windows open now. The air is clean. The silence is sacred. I don't know if Artyom gave up, moved out, or finally destroyed his own amp in a fit of rage. But I still keep the whistle in my drawer. Just in case. Story 7. This morning started out like every other. I took my usual bike route to work, helmet on, tires pumped, and cruising smoothly through the cool morning air. Birds were singing, trees rustled gently, and for once, traffic was light. The kind of peaceful ride that reminds you life can still be beautiful until someone ruins it. I always stick to the rules, proper lane, safe speed, using the designated bike path like a responsible adult. Which is more than I can say for half the people in this city. For some folks, rules are just suggestions or worse, decorations. About halfway through my commute, I saw her. A woman walking slowly down the middle of the bike path, tiny dog wobbling beside her on a retractable leash. There was a perfectly good sidewalk just meters away, crowded, sure, but functional. And still, she chose the one space meant for wheels, not heels. I rang my bell. Politely at first. Nothing. So I raised my voice. Excuse me, this is a bike lane. She looked up. Not startled. Not confused. Just defiant. We locked eyes. She didn't move. The dog, a small thing with fur like a mop and a retractable leash stretched taut, started to wander erratically across the lane. I had to slam my brakes, skidding just inches away from running over its paw. And that's when things got ridiculous. The woman screamed, actually screamed, like I had launched a missile at her dog. You almost hit my baby, she shouted, already storming toward me, eyes wide with outrage. You reckless maniac. Before I could explain, before I could say anything, she hurled the contents of her half-full coffee cup straight at my chest. Lukewarm liquid exploded across my jacket, splattering my handlebars and drenching my gloves. I just sat there stunned, dripping oat milk and cinnamon. You don't belong on this path, she yelled. Ma'am, I said calmly, pointing to the literal painted bike symbol beneath her feet, you're the one who doesn't belong on this path. That only made her angrier. A few people nearby started watching, their phones out, probably hoping for some viral clip. The small dog, oblivious to the chaos, sat down and licked its paw. She kept yelling about animal cruelty, about reckless behavior, about how I needed to be reported. I was still sitting on my bike, unmoving, trying to process how I became the villain in this bizarre sidewalk soap opera. Eventually, a jogger stepped in. Older guy, grizzled beard, headphones half off. Lady, this is a bike lane, he said. You're in the wrong. She turned on him too, accusing him of being part of some bike conspiracy. At that point, I just rode away, slowly, soaked and stunned. I made it to work 20 minutes late, reeking of cinnamon and commuter rage. Everyone asked what happened. I just said, latte ambush. Long story. But I know one thing, tomorrow I'm buying a helmet cam. Because next time someone weaponizes their coffee, I'm making sure there's proof. Story 8. I work as a technical expert at a hardware store, which is just a fancy way of saying I'm the one who fixes what others break or what they're too impatient to figure out. Printers, phones, laptops, watches, you name it, I've wrestled with it. Sometimes it's routine. Other times it's like performing surgery with chopsticks. But today was different. It started when Mark, one of our sales guys, waved me down with a half-excited, half-distracted look on his face. Hey man, he said, this customer's having trouble with her Apple Watch. It won't connect to her phone. Can you take a look? I nodded. Standard procedure. Just one small problem, he didn't mention the price. Store policy is very clear. Before a customer gets referred to me for anything hands-on, the salesperson has to tell them the service cost up front. It's printed on the wall. It's in the manual. It's even on the laminated sheet they keep at the register. For Apple Watch setup and troubleshooting? $30 flat. Mark just dropped her off and walked away. The girl was nice, at least. Early 20s, stylish but anxious, clearly not the kind of person who loves technology. I took her watch and her phone, sat at the bench, and got to work. What should have been a quick reconnection turned into an hour-long headache. The watch had been paired with an older device, locked into an iCloud loop, and the OS version was out of sync. I dug through forums, read obscure Reddit threads, cross-checked serial numbers, and finally got the watch synced. Her messages started popping in real time. She smiled like I had just fixed her entire life. And that's when it went south. I told her the total, $30. Her smile vanished. Wait, what? Mark didn't say anything about a price. I looked over at Mark, who was suddenly very interested in aligning a stack of empty boxes. She reached into her purse and counted out 10 crumpled dollars. That's all I've got. Sorry. I stood there holding the repaired device, unsure if I should laugh or sigh. I had just spent a full hour on what was essentially premium-level tech support, and now I was walking away with $10. 1/3 of what I was supposed to earn. She wasn't rude about it. In fact, she looked genuinely embarrassed. But it didn't matter. I got shorted. Because someone else didn't do their job. I wanted to snap at Mark. I wanted to call him out in front of everyone. But instead, I walked over and quietly said, "Hey, next time, tell them the price. You know the rules." He gave me this half-shrug, half-smirk. Didn't think it'd take you that long? I just stared at him. That's not the point. He didn't apologize. Didn't offer to cover the difference. Just went back to pretending he was busy. So now I'm stuck stewing in silent frustration. Not because of the $10, but because that hour of focus, energy, and effort got undercut by someone else's laziness. And worst of all, there'll probably be a next time. But I've already started printing up my own signs for the desk. Please confirm service pricing with sales staff before technical support begins. And if that doesn't work, I might just start requiring prepayment. Because around here, if I don't value my own time, no one else will. Story 9. Yesterday was one of those nights you hope doesn't repeat. My father had some of his old friends over, guys I barely know, the kind who think the volume knob doesn't exist and that any flat surface is a good place for a beer. It started out as laughter, clinking glasses, the occasional yell about the good old days. But as the night wore on, the energy shifted. Around 10 p.m. they moved to the garage, our garage, where my dad keeps his prized motorcycle. A vintage cruiser, black and chrome, polished more often than it's ridden. He treats the bike like it's sacred. I've been told never to touch it. And I haven't. Not once. But his friends? That's another story. While I was in my room trying to study for my college midterms, they were shouting, laughing, slamming tools around like kids in a toy aisle. I couldn't concentrate. Every time I opened my textbook, another crash echoed through the wall. At some point, I heard the rev of the engine, loud and struggling, like someone who didn't know what they were doing had forced it on. I even texted my dad to quiet things down, but of course, he didn't check his phone. Eventually, I gave up. I put on noise-canceling headphones and tried to memorize slides about post-war economic theory while praying the engine didn't explode. This morning, I woke up groggy and already behind. And then it started. I walked into the kitchen and found my dad standing there, red-eyed, breathing heavy, holding a broken handlebar grip in one hand. "You think this is funny?" he barked. I blinked. "What?" "My bike," he snarled. "It's wrecked. Scratches on the tank, grip torn, mirror loose. You were the only one here." I was stunned. My voice cracked as I tried to explain. "I didn't touch it. Your friends were out there all night. I was trying to study. You can check my search history, check anything." But he wasn't listening. He went on about respect, responsibility, how everything in this house gets ruined the second someone else lays hands on it. I could feel the anger behind his eyes, not fresh, not even about the bike, but something deeper, older. Something that's been sitting there for years. I stood my ground. Quiet but firm. "I didn't break your bike. I didn't even open the garage." Silence. Then, without saying another word, he dropped the grip on the counter and walked out the front door. Didn't look back. Didn't apologize. And I was just left standing there. Later that day, I found a half-empty bottle of whiskey in the garage sitting on the seat of the bike. And a deep boot scuff on the side panel, definitely not mine. Still, he hasn't said a word. And I probably won't get an apology. Not from him. Not ever. But I learned something today: when people don't want to face the truth, they'll throw it at whoever's closest. Even their own family. All I can do now is make sure that when I finally move out, I leave the kind of blame behind too. Story 10. I didn't mean to cause a medical emergency, I just wanted to save those cats. My grandmother had 16 of them. Not 2. Not 5. 16. At first, everyone thought it was cute. "Crazy cat lady," we'd say, laughing like it was a quirky little badge of honor. But I was the only one who ever actually went inside her house. It was a nightmare. The smell hit you like a wall the second you opened the door. Not just litter boxes, those were almost always full, overflowing with clumps and waste, but the entire house was covered in hair, fur mats, stale food, and what I can only describe as a moist layer of filth. They had taken over the place. Cats sleeping in kitchen cabinets. Cats using piles of laundry as toilets. I found one curled up inside the microwave. Another one was stuck behind the fridge, barely moving. And Grandma? She didn't seem to notice. Or care. She was getting forgetful. Maybe it was age, maybe something more serious, but she kept insisting she was taking care of her babies. Meanwhile, I was the one showing up every other day to dump out the litter, scrub the dried urine off the floor, and refill empty food bowls. She kept saying they were her family. But she wasn't acting like it. Then one night, I found a kitten under the sofa, skin and bones, breathing shallow. That was the last straw. The next morning, while Grandma was at her weekly hair appointment, I came with carriers. Every single cat, sick, scared, and some barely able to walk, I took them all. One trip to the emergency vet confirmed what I feared: infections, malnourishment, respiratory problems. The vet said if I'd waited even a week, some of them wouldn't have made it. I didn't want to tell her right away, but she called me in a panic when she got home and found the house silent. I tried to be gentle. I explained everything: how sick they were, how I was paying out of pocket for treatment, how the conditions were dangerous for both her and the animals. She went quiet. Then, mid-sentence, she slurred her words, dropped the phone, and the line cut off. I drove straight there, heart pounding. She'd collapsed. By the time I got to the hospital, the doctors said she'd had a mild stroke, likely stress-induced. She was conscious but confused, disoriented. When she saw me, the first thing she whispered was, "You took them." And I did. I still visit her. I still sit by her bed and try to talk about other things. Sometimes she listens. Sometimes she just stares out the window and asks if the cats are okay. They are. Most of them are covered. I found homes for 6 and I kept 2 myself. The rest are at a shelter that specializes in high-needs animals. I don't know if she'll ever forgive me. But I know this: if I hadn't stepped in, some of those animals would be gone. I didn't want to break her heart, I just wanted to stop it from hurting others. Sometimes doing the right thing makes you the villain in someone else's story. But at least the cats get to live a life where they're more than just symbols of someone's loneliness.